Chapter 146. 7th Year. Super Ego. Saturday, 1st of April, 1978. Watcher! Hello. God, cheer up a bit, sunshine, after I went to all that effort to book a bloody audience with you. Sorry, I'm really happy to hear from you. Christ, get posher by the day. Remus laughed despite himself. The sound echoed back through the receiver and made him think about Grant's voice travelling all the way through the telephone wire, from the very bottom of England, up through to him in the Scottish Highlands. Muggles were pretty magic too, really. How are you? He asked. Still enjoying the seaside? Winter was fucking dire, Grant replied, settling into the conversation. Remus could hear the cigarette between his teeth, the grind click of a Zippo lighter. He longed to see the other boy, to see his face and watch his expressions. Rain, freezing cold wind, comes off in the sea, rattles the windows worse than at St. Eddie's. Mind you, the students made up for it. Students? At the art college and Brighton Poly, you get loads of our sort at art schools. I was seeing an engineer, a poet and a painter. Is that 3 separate people or one very clever person? Remus asked wryly. Cheeky bugger. Wouldn't you like to know? Grant snickered. What about you, anyway? How's Loverboy? Remus snorted derisively. Fine. Fine? Fine. Grant exhaled loudly. Lord, not another fight, is it? Tell you what, sweetheart, you want to get on top of them moods of yours. What moods? Remus frowned. Grant laughed. You're the moodiest bloke I know. Worse than a girl on a blob when something's pissed you off, and you ain't even got a mouth on you. I've had broken ribs hurt less than some of the things you've said. You never said... Well, no, I'll let you get away with it, 'cause it was easier than picking a fight. Besides, it's not your fault. I'm the same, innit? We all are. Institutionalised kids. Institutionalised? It was an enormous word coming from Grant, but it felt rude to say so. God, Remus thought to himself. When did I become such a snob? Yep, apparently that's what we are. The poet told me. He was doing a course in psychology. Said I'm afraid to stay with one person too long because I was abandoned too much when I was small. Dumped him after that, obviously. I've been with Sirius for ages, Remus replied defensively. It's only ever been him. Got the same problem, though, Grant mused, as though they were just passing the time of day. When was the last time you let anyone be nice to you without saying something horrible back? Remus pressed his lips together. I don't do that, he said, though he already knew Grant was right. Bastard. If you say so, Grant returned casually. How's everything else, anyway? I met my mother. Crikey! Yeah, she's okay. Is that what got you all moody? No. Maybe. Wouldn't blame you if it was. I'll lose it for weeks when I see mine. Love's telling me how much she hates me. He always sounded as if he was smiling, even as he said this. It made it all the more unpleasant somehow. Well, mine didn't say that, Remus said. Actually, she says she loves me. That's nice, then. Yeah. You don't have to say it back, you know. She dumped you, that callous cow. She got no right to expect it. Remus reeled back a little at that, shocked. Anyway, she had her reasons. It's not like I don't feel anything for her, it's just hard to say. Suppose your psychologist friend would think that's down to me being institutionalised. Suppose so. But you never had a problem with, affection? Grant laughed again, a joyful cackle. If you don't reckon shagging every lad who looks at me sideways is a problem. I just mean you're more open. Remus couldn't go on. Grant's laughter was drowning everything out. Sorry. God, I forgot how funny you are. I thought I was moody. You're a complicated man, Remus bloody Lupin. That's why I love you. Remus groaned. Grant laughed again. Don't worry, not in a queer way. That made Remus laugh, and for a good few minutes after, the laughter was all that passed between them, through miles and miles of telephone wire. Remus walked back to Hogsmeade with a lighter step than he had an hour before. Just talking to someone outside of Hogwarts, outside of the war, was a wonderful relief. I wish there was a phone at school I could use, he'd said apologetically. I'd call you all the time. When we're eccentric millionaires, Grant mused, we can pay someone to carry a phone round for us everywhere we go. The engineer said they'll be able to do that, maybe by the 80s. I don't see how that would work, Remus frowned. Where would you plug it in? You're the one at a posh school, you tell me. He promised to meet the others and the 3 broomsticks after the phone call, which had taken weeks to plan. Sirius hadn't said anything when Remus headed toward the phone box outside of town. Maybe a few weeks ago he'd had offered to walk with him, but they still weren't being nice to each other. They weren't being nasty, but they weren't happy. It was tiring, but giving ground seemed like even harder work. Remus took a moment for himself before entering the pub. He smoked, leaning against the wall under the signpost. It was a bright spring day, and the first weekend he'd had in ages, which wasn't organised within an inch of his life. He watched the busy high street, happy students walking this way and that way with their friends, shopping bags bulging and faces beaming. How different was he from them? Was he any less? Not to his friends, he thought confidently. Not to Sirius. Suddenly he caught a familiar scent on the wind, and he searched the crowd quickly to find Chris, hurrying past. Oi! Oi, Christopher! Remus called to him. The mousy boy stopped, saw who was shouting, then came over, a bit reluctantly. Hello, Remus, he nodded, looking agitated. He didn't have his usual bag of books, and his clothes were smarter than usual. He smelled slightly different, too. A new soap. Or... it couldn't be cologne. Hiya, haven't seen you in ages, Remus smiled down at him. Yeah, been so busy. Then I had that cold, remember? Christopher didn't meet his eyes. He was blushing, but Christopher was always blushing, so Remus didn't put much stock in it. Oh yeah, feeling any better? Yes, thanks. Come in, the others are all inside. Oh, no, sorry, Remus. I'm meeting someone. Oh! Remus looked him up and down again. Well, now it made a bit more sense. Who? No one you know. Sorry, but do you mind? I'm going to be late. Course, sorry, Remus said, a little bit annoyed. Christopher had never brushed him off like that before. He watched him hurry off down the street and turn a corner. Fine. Remus stubbed out his cigarette and the pot of red geraniums on the doorstep to the pub, then pushed the door open and entered. James, Lily, Mary, Peter, Marlene, and Yaz were all sitting in a booth at the far corner, the table laden with empty glasses. He smiled over to them, ducking his head under the low black ceiling beams and raising a hand in greeting. Moony! James grinned, waving back. Peter and Mary moved along the plush green velvet seat to make room for him. How was your phone call? Lily asked brightly. Good, thanks, Remus nodded. What have you lot been up to? Planning the end of the year party? Mary smiled eagerly. My folks said they'll host, James said. We'll invite the whole year. Most of them, anyway. Sounds great, Remus grinned back. Things had been awkward between all of them because it was painfully obvious that he and Sirius were fighting. Lily tried to be practical and act as if she were above it all, but James was perpetually caught between them and never knew where to look. Right, come and get them! Sirius suddenly appeared over James's shoulder from the bar, a tray of pints in his arms. He looked up and saw Remus, and the smile died on his lips. Everyone looked away, embarrassed, and Remus felt something harden in his chest. A stream of scathing one-liners flashed up in his mind, spiteful, sharp things. It took an enormous effort to push them down. He didn't want it to be easier to be cruel than kind. He refused to be that kind of person. St. Edmund's couldn't be all he ever was. Hiya, he smiled, lowering his head so his hair fell into his eyes, and he had to push the curls back. He was such a mess. He ought to get it cut. Hi, Sirius set the tray down with a clank. I'll go back and get you. Remus can have mine, Mary said, getting out of the booth. Samuel from my charms group has been throwing me looks all afternoon. Have my seat, Black. She nudged him into the seat, and Sirius gingerly took his place beside Remus. See you later, Mary trilled, sashaying away across the pub floor to a group of Ravenclaw boys. Marlene grinned and shook her head at Yaz, who laughed and squeezed her hand on top of the table. Remus's heart skipped, and he glanced round furtively. No one was looking, Their little booth was in an awkward corner of the room, away from the windows and poorly lit by gaslights. No doubt the privacy was why they'd chosen it. Remus now saw that all of his friends were rosy-cheeked and glassy-eyed from beer. Lily was practically sitting in James's lap, and his right hand had vanished up the back of her jumper. "How was the call?" Sirius asked neutrally, looking down at the beer. "Good," Remus replied quietly. "He sounded really well. Happy." "That's nice." Remus took a deep swig of beer for courage. Peter was talking Quidditch with Marlene and Yaz. James and Lily only had eyes for each other. He turned to Sirius, twisting sideways in his seat. "I'm such a prick," he said. "Yep." Sirius drank too, still not really looking at Remus, though the corner of his lips turned as he tilted his head back. The flash of white skin on his neck as he swallowed caught Remus's attention. He budged on the seat closer to Sirius. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so that only Sirius could hear him. "I can't talk to you about anything sometimes without you biting my head off," Sirius grumbled. "You get into these moods and I can't reach you." "I know," Remus said, trying not to get too sidetracked by the way Sirius's Adam's apple bobbed, or the way his pulse fluttered in that hollow above his collarbone, or his lovely slender wrists, and how he'd love to hold them fast and... Remus looked round once more, just in case, before leaning in closer, pushing Sirius's head back with his fingers, and kissing that beautiful neck, flicking his tongue up just behind his earlobe. He heard Sirius's sharp intake of breath, and the blood rushing so fast in his veins it sounded like fizzing, and Remus's own temperature began to rise. "I'm really sorry," he said again. "It's my fault, and I'll do better." "Better?" Sirius muttered, his head bowed so that his hair fell over his face. "Better. I'm sorry. I lose my temper when people tell me what to do, but I'm going to try." Sirius's head inclined toward him, and Remus pulled away so that they could look each other in the eye. He wasn't angry or guarded anymore, which was a relief. "Suppose it's not really my job to tell you what to do in the first place," Sirius said, giving way so easily. He couldn't hold grudges, except maybe for his family. He was too good, inside and out. Remus felt another pang of guilt at that, and it fortified his resolve. He would do everything to change, to deserve Sirius's blind loyalty. "No, but I don't have to be such a dick about it," Remus countered, moving back a bit more and reaching for his drink. "I'll make it up to you, I promise." "Oh, yeah?" Sirius cocked an eyebrow. All things forgiven, his mind had clearly returned to its usual preoccupation. "Later," Remus returned imperiously, giving him a light slap on the thigh. "So what did Grant say?" Sirius settled back comfortably into the corner of the booth. The uncomfortable part over, his posture relaxed. He rested a boot against the nearest free stool, leaning forward on his knee. "Oh, we just caught up," Remus said, swilling his beer lightly. "He's still working in Brighton, has his own flat, wants to get a car for weekends." "We should go there after school's finished," Sirius suggested. "If you wanted, if there's time for a holiday." "Maybe," Remus nodded, drinking again. None of them knew what would happen when school ended, not really. Even James and Lily were hazy on the details. "So I told him I'd hex his bollocks off if he asked me one more time," Yaz was saying, Marlene giggling and hiding her face in her hands. "You're awful. Well, he needs to learn his lesson." "Who?" James and Sirius both asked, neither of them wanting to be left out of any gossip. "Ugh, Lockhart!" Yaz tossed her head haughtily, her ponytail swinging. "Is he bothering you lot again?" James frowned. "I told him to stay away from my team. I'll tell Flitwick." "Don't worry, he got the message this time," Marlene laughed. "Yaz is convincing." "What does he want?" Sirius asked. "He just keeps sniffing around, trying to find out what we're up to," James sighed, shaking his head. "Reckons he's being left out. He's like a more hygiene-conscious version of Snape in 5th year." Lily elbowed him in the ribs, which only made James laugh. "Left out of what?" Remus frowned. "He doesn't even play, and he's a Ravenclaw. They lost the last game." "Moony!" Sirius exclaimed. "Did you just demonstrate Quidditch knowledge?" Everyone laughed at him, and Remus mock sulked, drinking more beer. Hard to avoid it in our bloody dorm, he retorted. Anyway, it's not the Quidditch team he's interested in. James shook his head, grinning. It's the other thing. He said this very ominously, eyebrows knit together and casting suspicious looks around the pub. Ah, Remus thought. The prank. He hasn't asked me, Remus said with a shrug. That's because you got everyone fooled, Marlene replied. This whole school somehow thinks you're the mild one out of this lot. Remus smiled at her very sweetly. Are you suggesting I'm not? He raised an eyebrow, grinning at her. Beside him, Sirius made a small, strange noise in the back of his throat. His pulse hadn't quite settled down yet. Right. Lily stood up, draining her drink and wiping her lips on the back of her sleeve. We've got 2 hours before I've got to start herding the prefects back, and I need to go to Scrivenshafts before it closes. Potter? Yep, coming. James necked the dregs of his own pint. We both need broom polish if you want to come, Pete, Marlene said kindly. Wormtail had been left out a lot lately. Even Dorcas was ignoring him. Great! He stood up eagerly, following James out of the booth. Black? Marlene looked at Sirius. Didn't you want new gloves? I'll order them from Quidditch Monthly, he replied, barely looking up at her. Suit yourself, she shrugged. There was a bit of commotion as they all gathered their things together and settled the bill, but finally Remus and Sirius were left alone. Remus turned to him slowly, trying to look innocent. What do you fancy doing then? Walk? Honeydukes? When the dorm room is guaranteed to be empty for at least 2 hours? Sirius licked his lips. More like an hour and a half by the time we get up there. Better get a move on then. Oi, Remus smirked, standing up, hands in his pockets. I thought I told you I don't like being told what to do. They walked out of the pub single file and Remus held the door open. As Sirius edged past him, shuffling sideways, he leaned forward subtly and whispered, You'll just have to tell me what to do then. Remus grinned. Chapter 147, 7th Year, Night and Day. Friday, 28th of April, 1978. Remus, fuck's sake, wake up. Piss off, Remus grumbled, shaken awake. It's middle of the night. You're grinding your teeth again, Sirius complained. I can't help it, go to sleep. I can't between your gnashing and Prongs' snoring and Wormtail getting up every 5 minutes, how can I? Oi! A voice came from across the room. I have a nervous bladder. You shouldn't drink so much before bed, Sirius hissed back. Sorry, Mother, Peter retorted grumpily. I didn't realize you were monitoring my biology. You trip over your dirty laundry every time you get up. Actually, it was Moony's books. Not mine, Remus called. For the prank. All of you shut up, James yelled. They were quiet for a minute. Bloody Wormtail, Sirius muttered into his pillow, rolling over. Great, now I need the loo, Remus grumbled, getting out of his bed, his bare feet hitting the cold floorboards. He didn't turn the light on in the bathroom in an attempt to stay semi-asleep, but it was no good. By the time he'd got up, crossed the room, peed and washed his hands, Remus was fully awake. And his jaw hurt, so Sirius must have been right about the grinding. It was for the same reason Peter had been up and down all night, and probably the same reason Sirius couldn't sleep. NEWTs started next week. As he exited the little bathroom, Peter rushed forward to go in again, reaching for the panel of light switches on the wall as he did, and hitting the wrong one. Remus winced, feeling as if his retinas had blown out as startling artificial brightness filled the room. Wormtail, you prick! Sirius growled from the bed. Remus had left the curtains partway open, and the light struck across his face like a laser beam. Sorry, Peter said, hopping from foot to foot as he fumbled with the switches on the wall. I didn't mean to get that one. I can't wait until I don't have to share a room with you anymore, you little rodent, Sirius spat, sitting up. Don't you ever think about anyone else? Shut up, dickhead, Peter replied, sounding sleepy and upset. Think I like sharing with you and Moony? What about me and Moony? Sirius sat up sharply. Just go to the loo, Peter, Remus sighed, flicking on the bathroom light and then flicking off the big overhead bedroom light so that they were cast into darkness once more. Peter slammed the door and locked it. "Silly little sod," Sirius grumbled to himself. "Sirius," Remus snapped in that authoritative voice that always worked. "Stop whining." Sirius pressed his lips together, falling instantly quiet, eyes trained on Remus. "Good boy," Remus smirked. He rubbed the back of his head, glancing at the clock on Peter's bedside table. 3:30. "I'm going downstairs. I won't be able to sleep now," he said. "And you can have some peace." They'd been sharing Remus's bed for the past few nights now, and though it was large, it really wasn't meant for 2 full-grown boys. Unfortunately, they no longer had a choice, since Sirius's own bed had disappeared earlier that week. They'd been practicing for the prank and hit a bit of a snag with the main incantation. Sirius remained cheerfully optimistic that it would show up again eventually, but Remus was less sure. He went quietly down the stairs, book under his arm. Remus loved the common room when it was empty. It was filled with some of his very happiest memories of Hogwarts. He went over and opened the big bay window. He was always too warm, and forever getting yelled at for opening windows to let cold air in, but no one was around to complain. Remus inhaled the scent of the forest and the castle, the night sky and the snow from the mountains, the velvety smooth water of the lake, and every blade of grass on the Quidditch pitch. Hogwarts. He wondered if he would ever feel so at home anywhere ever again. Remus shook his head, realizing how silly and sentimental he was being. He left the windows wide and turned back into the room, settling down on the big velvet couch and opening his book. He flicked his wand at the kettle hanging over the fire, and it began to heat up. He flicked through his book as his tea brewed, trying to find his place. Where would he get his books after Hogwarts? It was easy enough to join a Muggle library, but did wizards have them too? Another question for Sirius. Or maybe Chris, when Remus saw him next. Christopher had been very elusive since they'd bumped into each other in Hogsmeade. Just as the kettle boiled, Remus's ears pricked at the sound of familiar footsteps descending down the dormitory staircase. He smiled a secret smile to himself, and without turning around, simply summoned a second teacup from the cabinet, getting ready to pour. "Thought you wanted to sleep," he said mildly, as Sirius padded across the carpet, wrapped in his bed blanket, and sat in the warm spot Remus had left in the couch. "Prongs is snoring still," Sirius yawned, pulling the blanket tighter as Remus brought over the tea. "Bloody hell, it's freezing down here. I'll shut the window. No, it's okay. I'll warm up." Remus sat down with his tea, muttering "Levio Liber" at his book so that he could read it with his tea in one hand and an arm round Sirius, who leaned sleepily against his shoulder. Will it be like this, Remus wondered, after Hogwarts? Nights on the couch with no one bothering us? "What are you reading?" Sirius asked, watching the heavy book levitating just above Remus's lap. "Oh, something I found on Legilimency." "Oh?" Sirius raised his head, a small frown forming. "Why?" "Just interested," Remus replied. "Wanted to read something outside of my NEWT core texts, and I thought, mind reading, cool. Who wouldn't want to?" "I think it ought to be illegal," Sirius said, suddenly prickly. Remus didn't know why. "It's an invasion of privacy. Practically a dark art." "Well, I'm only reading about it," Remus said carefully. "I didn't mean you would," Sirius sighed, settling back down. Seeing it had upset Sirius, Remus allowed the book to set itself down and stroked his hair gently, because he always liked it, even if he pretended he didn't. He felt Sirius begin to relax, before saying in an odd voice, "Sorry, it's just I didn't mean to snap. It's my mother can do it. She's a Legilimens." "Oh. So she could find out what we were up to, where our loyalties lay." "I'm sorry, Padfoot." Remus squeezed his arm. That protective feeling came back, cold and sweet like adrenaline. "Don't be, I'm well shot of her, mad old bat, and I'd sort of learned to deflect it by the end. Made her so angry." He let out a hollow chuckle. "You learned occlumency?" Remus raised his eyebrows. "That's incredible." "Not exactly." Sirius frowned again, but this time Remus knew it was because he was thinking very hard. He sat up, pulling away from Remus, and leaned over to set his tea down on the coffee table. "It's more like You just learn not to think the things she wants you to think. It got worse when we were teenagers, you know. She was worried about impure thoughts. Toujours peur. So I'd just distract her by thinking something else. So she wouldn't find out about Mary? Remus asked. Or the other Muggle-born girls? Sirius fidgeted with his hands, looking away. Yeah, that. And, well, whatever anything else I didn't want her to know. Trouble is, you end up confusing yourself. It's like you're tying your own thoughts up in knots. Hard to unpack. Afraid you used to get the raw end of that a bit. He met Remus's eyes then, and he looked so ashamed and sorry that Remus realized exactly what he meant. Was that why it had been so difficult in the beginning? Why Sirius had been so insisting on pretending that nothing was going on between the two of them? Remus put down his tea and hugged Sirius tightly. He hated her. He hated the war, and he hated himself for not being able to say the right words. This was one of those times it would have really mattered, too. Sirius, he said, heart pounding as they released each other. It's fine, Moony. It's over now. Sirius smiled at him bravely. I know, but I want you to know. I want to tell you. I really, I know. Sirius kissed him gently, wrapping his arms round him once more and squeezing him back. Me too. Friday, 5th of May, 1978. I failed, Marlene whispered as they left the exam hall, wringing her hands together. You did not. Mary slung her arm round her friend's shoulder. At least it's over, Marlene sighed. Don't, you're making me all emotional, Mary laughed. How about you, Lupin? She reached out to link her arm with his as the three of them walked down the corridor towards the grounds. Am I emotional? He asked, raising an eyebrow. How do you think you did? Mary clarified. I know you're stoic. Oh, I think the question on basilisks threw me a bit, but I think I managed. Modest and stoic. My dream man, Mary sighed. I've got to go, Marlene said as they turned a corner. Sorry, I said I'd meet Yasmin. Mary finished for her a bit cattily. She let Marlene out from under her arm. Off your pop, then. Moody cow, Marlene poked her tongue out. You know I love you forever. Back at you. Mary scrunched up her nose. See you at dinner. Bye, Marlene, Remus said politely. They were friends again, but it still felt weird. See ya. Mary kept her grip on Remus's arm and looked up at him. You're not about to abandon me for a raven-haired Quidditch player too, are you? She asked. Honestly, it's like a club you're all in. Shut up, he laughed. And no, he's got his Muggle Studies exam. So you're mine? All yours, he nodded. She grinned and kissed his cheek. They kept walking, heading for the sunshine. I think I mucked up the bit on cockatrices, Mary mused. I could never take them seriously enough to study. I mean, for God's sake, half dragon, half chicken? Fucking nonsense. Still, I reckon I passed okay. I'm sure you did, Remus said. You worked hard. We all did. Worked harder when Ferox was teaching, Mary grinned. Me too, Remus replied casually, causing Mary to burst into giggles. He liked shocking her. It was hard to do most of the time. Mind you, she took everything in her stride. No sooner had they turned the last corner than she stopped in her tracks, a look of distaste crossing her face. Ugh, it's Rotherhide. Remus followed her line of vision. They were just at the final archway which led onto the grounds. It was a sunny day, if a bit cool, and after a rainy start to the year, every student not in lessons or exams was out enjoying the weather. Roman Rotherhide, the 7th-year Ravenclaw heartthrob, was loitering with a few of his friends just ahead. He and Mary had been on and off for years, and judging by the look on her face, they were definitely off now. What's he done? Remus asked. Nothing, he just annoys me, she said. Some days all of them do. Boys? Wizards. Fair enough. Come on, let's just keep walking. Snog me! Mary turned to him. Go on, it'll drive him mad. Quick, he's looking. Mary! Remus laughed, veering away from her. No! Please? No! Ugh, some friend you are, she grumbled. Come on, then. You're mental. Remus shook his head, following her. He sighed and slipped his hand in hers. There, will that do? My hero, she grinned up at him, squeezing his hand back, swinging it back and forth so that Roman was sure to notice. They settled underneath a large beech tree near the lake. Remus lay on his back with his arms behind his head, watching the boughs creak slowly above, while Mary began to file and paint her fingernails. Sirius had made Remus promise not to start revising for anything else once his Care of Magical Creatures exam was finished, and for once Remus didn't argue. He was right in the sweet spot between full moons, where he felt the most healthy and human. Plus, lessons were finished forever, which meant he had no homework, and everyone was in a good mood lately. Why lock himself away in the library? God, I can't wait for it to be all over, Mary said. I'll miss all of you, obviously, but I'm done with school. Do you know what you're going to do after? Remus asked, closing his eyes and staring at the bright red veins of his eyelids. Mum wants me to do a typing course, get a proper job. You could if you wanted, Remus mused. You could charm a typewriter easy. I ought to. That'd show Mum. Anyway, I'll probably get myself up the duff and have to get married by the time I'm 19, like she did. Then it's cooking, laundry, and church for the rest of my life. What a cheery thought, Remus snorted. Lily said you lot were going to help Dumbledore, Mary said suddenly. Remus opened his eyes and turned his head, squinting up at her. She was wearing a pair of white-framed cat-eye sunglasses, so he couldn't see her eyes, but her mouth was serious, no longer chirpy. That's right, he said. So, what? You're going to finish school and go and save the world? Well, Remus said steadily, we'll start by winning the war anyway. Remus, please don't. He sat up, annoyed. Why are you bringing this up? Because Lily's lost all sense of reason since she's with Potter. Potter and Black think they're untouchable anyway, and Peter can't think for himself. You're the sensible one. No, I'm not. I think about the attacks at Christmas. Marlene's brother. The way people are looking at each other these days. I'm frightened. It's going to get worse. Yes, it is, he said, his voice hard. Unless someone stops it. But why does it have to be you? Any of you? Let Dumbledore fight if he's as powerful as everyone says. Why does he need kids to help him? We're not kids. Mary, this isn't about Dumbledore or even Voldemort. It's about the whole wizarding world, the community, making it a place where we can all... Remus, you're never going to be one of them. Excuse me? Look, do you know why my family ended up in the UK? My granddad fought in the war. He got medals and all that crap, gratitude of the Empire. Said they couldn't have beat Hitler without the soldiers of the Commonwealth. Do you know what happened to that gratitude when the war was over? When he moved here for a better life? Do you know what they called him? She shook her head angrily. Things don't change because of stupid heroics. People don't change. Even if we win the war, even if that creepy Dark Lord bloke is imprisoned or defeated or whatever, Potter and Black might get the victory parades, but no one's going to... You're going to be an outsider forever. Look at the way Danny's been treated. Mary, Remus said, his tone very cold now. How had they even got into this? They never fought. I'm not going to discuss this any further. Don't be angry with me, she said. I'm only trying to... I know, but I'm not interested. Remus, Why don't we practice some charms? Exams in 2 days. He stood up, pulling out his wand. Mary remained seated on the grass. She looked up at him, lowering her sunglasses, her brown eyes reproachful. She pursed her lips, then gave a little shrug. Okay, just let me finish my nails. Chapter 148, 7th Year. The Final. Content warning for some bullying and bad language from start to finish. Oh fuck. Oh buggering hell. How on earth had this happened? How had he let it get this far? Remus's mouth was dry, his palms damp, and the less said about his insides the better. He wished he had Sirius nearby, or even James to help him calm down, but no one could help him now. He was on his own. McGonagall turned to him. "Ready, Mr. Lupin?" He swallowed hard and nodded. Time to bite the bullet. Fuck's sake. This was all Christopher's fault. The whole mess had started 4 days earlier. The Marauders were in the library studying for their very last exam, arithmancy. Well, Peter didn't take arithmancy, but he was there anyway, ostensibly for moral support, but mostly to provide sustenance. He'd been a godsend to Remus in particular, making hourly trips down to the kitchens and back with cauldron cakes, pasties, bacon butties, and jam tarts. "It's 11:30, Sirius yawned. "Come on, I don't think my brain can absorb any more knowledge tonight." "I don't think your brain ever absorbed any—" Ow! James winced as Sirius kicked him under the table. "Come on," he repeated. "It'll be curfew soon anyway." "With the head boy, I don't think curfew matters," Remus replied, scribbling as fast as his quill would let him. But James had caught Sirius's yawn. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, leaning away from the desk. "Nah, Padfoot's right. We've been here for hours. Let's call it quits and have a refresher session tomorrow." Peter was looking at Remus hopefully, clearly bored out of his mind. Remus frowned at all of them. "You lot go if you want, but I'll kick myself if I waste any time on this. It's our last exam." "You're hardly wasting time," Sirius said. "You've been in the library so much this term, they're considering putting up a plaque in your honour." "It's necessary," Remus said. "I want to beat Snape." "And you will," Sirius soothed. "Come on, you're getting black rings under your eyes." "Oh no," Remus sighed sarcastically, packing away his papers. "My roguish good looks ruined." "Shut up, you handsome prick." Sirius elbowed him lightly. They gathered the rest of their books, cleaned up the crumbs as best they could, and headed for the library exit. There were still plenty of students studying, all in various states of distress. "I can't wait for it to be all over," Peter whispered. "Imagine, no more homework, forever." Remus must have looked stricken at this, because Sirius barked with laughter and threw an arm round his shoulders. That was a brotherly gesture, Remus decided, so he permitted it in public. "You'll still have deadlines," James mused, yawning again as they entered dimly lit castle corridors. "If you want to do ministry work, Dad complains about them all the time." "Doubt I'll ever be as important as your dad," Peter replied, shoving his hands in his pockets. "How are the applications going anyway?" James asked him. "Oh, all right. Mum says my stepdad might be able to put in a good word, you know, in case I don't hear back from anywhere." "It won't be because of you, Wormy," James said. "They're making cuts everywhere, because of the war. Things are hard all over." "Not for Quidditch players," Peter muttered. Sirius shook his head disapprovingly, but said nothing. "I'm not going to be a Quidditch player," James said lightly. "Not until the war's won." The unspoken thing here, Remus thought, was the fact that James actually didn't need a job, war nor war, talent or no talent. It was the same for Sirius, who was so wealthy he never talked about money at all. Though he didn't agree with the bitterness, Remus sympathised with Peter on this. The Pettigrews were firmly middle class, and while he'd always had a comfortable enough life, he'd be expected to start making money as soon as possible. Whereas Remus, who was barely working class even on a good day— He was interrupted from his thoughts by an odd noise up ahead and stopped in his tracks. The others stopped too. "What's wrong?" Sirius asked. "Forget something?" Remus shook his head, listening. He whispered to his friends. "There's someone round the corner." He could hear them breathing, but they weren't moving, neither coming nor going, which was extremely suspicious, even given the time of night. "Filch?" James whispered. Remus shook his head. "I think it's—" He strode ahead, turning the corner. "Chris!" "Oh, hello. Remus?" Christopher smiled at him dazedly. He wasn't doing anything. He was just standing there, leaning against the wall, staring into space. "Are you okay?" "Oh, yes." The younger boy nodded again emphatically. "Very well, thanks. Very good. Very fine indeed." "Is he stoned?" Sirius was already at Remus's side and was surveying Chris with thinly disguised amusement. "I don't think so." Remus frowned. He reached out and touched Chris's arm gently, speaking slowly. "Christopher, what are you doing? It's almost curfew. Are you on patrol?" "Patrol?" Christopher stared at him blankly before blinking, then nodded again, grinning. Yes, that must be it." "He's confounded," James said. "Christopher, has anyone cast a spell on you tonight, or near you, and it backfired?" "Maybe he did it to himself," Wormtail suggested. "I did that once, remember?" "No, Chris wouldn't try to confound someone," Remus shook his head. "Chris, who was the last person you saw?"
Oh, was it you?"
"No." Remus put his hands on Christopher's shoulders, meeting his eyes and trying to hold his attention. "No, not me. Concentrate. Before I got here, what were you doing?"
"Was I patrolling?"
"No, I mean... Oh, come on, let's get back to the tower, eh?" Remus kept his hand on Christopher's shoulder and began gently but firmly steering him up the corridor, throwing anxious looks at the others. "Should we tell someone?" Sirius asked James. "Or, I don't know, take him to Madame Pomfrey?"
"I'm not ill,"
Christopher piped up chirpily. James ran his hands through his hair, shrugging.
"I don't know. We'll ask Lily. She'll know what to do."
Lily did not know what to do. She stood with a hand on her hip and a skeptical look on her face and asked him a few questions, but was as stumped as the rest of them. He sat before her quite happily in an armchair, smiling back up at them. He didn't seem to mind the interrogation, and while he couldn't give them any real information, he answered everything with cheerful blank politeness. Giving up, Lily clicked her tongue.
"I mean, he looks okay, and he doesn't seem upset. Christopher, did you get into a fight with someone? An argument?"
"I don't think so," Christopher said thoughtfully, his voice thick and dreamy. He yawned. "I think I'll go to bed, if that's all right with you lot." Remus, James, and Lily all looked at each other helplessly. Then Lily turned to James.
"Take him up, will you? Just make sure he doesn't get lost on the way."
James nodded, happy to be able to take action, and slapped Christopher on the back. "Come on then, mate. Let's get to your dorm." Lily, Remus, Sirius, and Peter watched them vanish up the staircase.
"Weird," Lily said. "No one else was around?"
"Not that I saw," Remus said. "But God knows how long he was standing there."
"Well, he was on the rota for patrol this evening," she said, pulling out her little leather-bound organizer to check. "I always tell the prefects to go round in pairs, though, so he shouldn't have been alone. He's usually so reliable. I'll talk to him in the morning. Maybe he'll be a bit sharper then."
"Doesn't look like he came to any harm," Peter said offhandedly, flicking through an old copy of Quidditch Weekly. "Maybe he was drunk or stoned or whatever, and he's just trying to cover his tracks." Remus disagreed. It was too wildly out of character. But then he hadn't seen much of Chris lately. They'd both been so busy. He remembered bumping into the younger boy in Hogsmeade a while ago. He'd been acting strangely then, too, but Remus had assumed he was meeting someone and didn't want Remus to know who. And if anyone respected other people's privacy, it was Remus. James returned, saying Chris had seemed fine once he was in his bedroom, and they didn't talk about it much for the rest of the evening. Just one of those things. In a school full of adolescents learning to use magic, it wasn't entirely out of the ordinary for accidents to happen. Talk soon turned to the upcoming Gryffindor vs. Slytherin Quidditch match, the final match of the year, and the final game of James and Sirius's school careers. Remus zoned out a bit, letting his three friends work themselves up about it. Secretly, he couldn't wait for it to be done with. As much as it made them all happy, and as much as he wanted Gryffindor to win, it wasn't half boring to listen to all the time. He picked up his arithmancy book and returned to his revision, settling into the comfiest armchair. "Moony, come on. Bedtime." Sirius woke him half an hour later. Damn. Remus blinked blearily, looking down at his textbook. He'd barely got past the first paragraph before falling asleep, his quill still poised between his fingers. "Bollocks," he muttered, closing the book and stretching. Sirius chuckled. "Told you that was enough for one day." Remus just yawned at him getting up. The common room had cleared out almost completely now, except for James and Lily, who were saying good night on the couch. That usually took a while, so the other three Marauders left them to it, climbing the stairs to bed.
The next morning, Remus was woken by Sirius, or rather the absence of Sirius. He was just crawling out of bed and trying to be sneaky about it.
Stay.
Remus reached for him sleepily, trying to pull him back. His hands ran over the skin of Sirius's upper arms. Sirius had fantastic skin. It was so smoothed and unblemished, everywhere except for the backs of his legs. He kept talking about wanting tattoos, a thought which horrified Remus.
Sorry, Moony,
Sirius grinned, gently untangling himself.
Big game in 2 days. Got to practice. What time is it? Just gone 5.
Ugh. Remus flopped back down on the bed, throwing the blankets over his head.
You're all mental. Yup,
Sirius laughed.
Go back to sleep. I'll see you later.
He left carefully, closing the curtains behind him. Remus rolled into the warm hollow that Sirius's body had left behind, inhaled the scent on his pillow, and drifted back to sleep. He woke up just in time to catch the last of breakfast, then returned to the library where he met Lily for some more arithmancy study.
I'm so tired of numbers,
Lily groaned, rubbing her eyes. They were a few hours in, and it would be lunch soon.
I'm really going to miss it, Remus replied. I like the charts. They're relaxing.
Well, I'm just glad there's nothing like this in potions.
James said you were looking into a job in an apothecary?
Maybe, Lily shrugged. I'd like to do something like that. Maybe research for St. Mungo's. Slughorn offered to write recommendations for me. But things will be complicated for a while, I think. James is optimistic, but...
Yeah, Remus nodded. We'll have to wait and see, won't we?
Shall we go down for lunch? She closed her book, brushing her hair over one shoulder. The boys will be finished soon. We can meet them. Remus's stomach growled and he gave in.
Go on, then.
Just as they were getting up to go, the library doors swung open and Madame Pince screeched, No running! Lily, Remus, I need your help. Christopher came charging up to them so fast his legs hit their desk, banging all the books forward. What's wrong? Lily asked, her emerald eyes wide. I can't explain. You just need to see.
See what?
Remus asked, reordering his book pile. I've done something stupid. Please come now, Chris pleaded. His face was red and shiny from running, and while he was definitely looking more alert than he had the evening before, he was clearly genuinely upset by something. So they went. He led them to the charms corridor, and the whole way there kept babbling about how it had been an accident and how he hadn't meant it to happen. Lily kept trying to get some sense out of him, but he wouldn't give them so much as a hint. Finally, he stood before the closed charms corridor. Professor Flitwick really ought to start locking it, Remus thought to himself, as Christopher faced them, pale and trembling. He fidgeted with the sleeves of his robes, looking down. Okay, please don't panic. It was an accident. Christopher, just show us, will you? Snapped Lily, tapping her foot on the flagstone floor. Christopher jumped at her authoritative tone, usually reserved for students who were misbehaving, but he took a deep breath and pushed the door open, ushering them in and slamming it shut behind them. What on earth? Lily breathed when they saw it. What stood before them was an enormous, quivering, glistening blue jelly. It was easily the size of Flitwick's desk and just stood there in the middle of the classroom, translucent and wobbling. Remus stifled a laugh. In 7 years at Hogwarts, this was definitely one of the most ridiculous things he'd ever seen. Christopher hung his head. He attacked me. It was self-defense. Remus stopped laughing and looked again. That's a person? Chris, what the fuck? Remus, language. Lily elbowed him. Christopher, who is that? It's Roy. Gilderoy. Lockhart? Am I going to get in trouble? Chris blinked at them both, his brown eyes huge and frightened. What did you... How did you... Lily gaped. It was a jelly legs, Jinx. I just expanded on it a bit. Remus taught me. Lily glared at Remus, who held his hands up. James taught me, and it never had that result. But why did you do it, Chris? Lily asked, still staring. He was going to confund me again. Wait, what, Lockhart? It was Lockhart? Christopher nodded, shrinking from Lily's temper. He was embarrassed, Remus could tell. He looked at his feet. He did it the other day, but it backfired. I think I tried to dodge it. Maybe he's done it before, I don't know. But why? He was worried I was going to tell. Tell what? Christopher, for goodness sake! Lily folded her arms angrily. Remus felt a stab of sympathy as Chris's cheeks turned a deeper shade of red.
Look, Lily, it doesn't matter now, does it?
He said, turning her to try and shift focus away from Christopher.
We ought to get Lockhart looked at first.
He wasn't sure how he managed it, but in the end he convinced Lily to go and get Madame Pomfrey while he and Christopher waited with the jellified Lockhart. Once she'd gone, Christopher seemed to become even more anxious. I'm going to get expelled.
No, you're not.
Remus leaned against the wall casually, pulling out his cigarette case. He offered one to Chris, who shook his head, fidgeting and worrying the cuffs of his sleeves.
James and Sirius have done worse than this.
I've never had a detention before.
Seriously?
Remus raised his eyebrows as he lit his fag.
Well, it's not that bad. You'll survive. So, do you want to tell me what's been going on?
Christopher looked at him, his cheeks darkening again.
I'm guessing that's who you were meeting in Hogsmeade that time?
Remus prompted, trying to make it easier. Chris looked at his feet again and nodded.
Okay.
Remus exhaled smoke. He was surprised, obviously, and more than intrigued, but he had to try not to show it if he was going to get any more out of Chris.
So you met up a few times?
Another nod.
And then...
Remus tried to piece it together.
Something went wrong. You had a fight?
Sort of. God, this was excruciating.
Look, Chris, I don't care, okay? He's a prat who had it coming to him either way, and if you and he... Well, it doesn't matter, does it?
I don't want you to think I'm stupid or naive or something. I didn't even fancy him that much, I swear it. I was just kissing and, he showed an interest and I thought, well, this might be my only chance.
Oh.
Remus's heart went out to him. He touched his shoulder, gripping it in what he hoped was a comforting gesture.
Of course it's not your only chance. People don't get just one chance.
Well, whatever, Chris said, looking at the space just over Remus's shoulder, but definitely not at Remus. I suppose it has to do a lot with luck. Anyway, he was a prick. Turned out all he really wanted to find out was about the prank thing. He thought you and I were. He thought I could give him inside information.
Well, you could, Remus replied. You did half the working out with me. You know more than Sirius knows.
I didn't, Chris said. I didn't tell him anything.
Good. Knew you wouldn't.
Chris smiled at that and met Remus's eye properly for the first time. I told him to keep his nose out. He got annoyed and called me something horrible. Then I got angry and I told him I was going to tell everyone what we'd been up to, and he must have panicked. Chris sighed heavily. I wouldn't have said anything, I swear. It wouldn't be that nasty. I was just angry, that's all.
I know, mate, Remus reassured him. So he tried to confound you so you couldn't tell anyone?
Chris nodded. All I can think is that I must have tried to deflect it somehow, which weakened it. Probably why I was acting so strangely yesterday.
And this?
Remus gestured at the Lockhart jelly. When I woke up this morning, a bit more of my memory had come back. I realised what he'd done and came to confront him. I lost my temper a bit.
Well,
Remus snubbed out his cigarette.
I'm not going to have a go at you for that.
Lily was another matter. She returned with Madame Pomfrey and Professor McGonagall. By then, Remus had already decided what he was going to do. Will one of you boys please explain what happened here? The head of year said, her eyes silvery and sharp. Remus was slightly taller than her now, but somehow McGonagall always seemed larger than life, especially when she was about to tell you off.
No idea,
Remus said promptly, ignoring Lily's look of horror beyond McGonagall's shoulder.
Chris just found him like this, didn't you, Chris?
Christopher looked desperately at Remus, then McGonagall, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, he just nodded. Really, Mr. Lupin? McGonagall raised a dark eyebrow.
Yep,
He put his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual. Mr. Barley simply happened upon Mr. Lockhart already in this. She gestured at the enormous jelly, which Madame Pomfrey was now circling slowly, muttering under her breath. Altered state! Yes, Remus nodded firmly. He'd have liked another fag, but wasn't that brazen? Then please explain. McGonagall's lips curled at the corners. How Mr. Barley knew that this was Mr. Lockhart at all?
Remus glanced back at the big blue blob. Well, looks like him, doesn't it?
This won't take too long, Minerva, Madame Pomfrey said cheerfully. No long-term harm done, but he'll be out of action for a few days. She began waving her wand and murmuring incantations. I take attacks on students very seriously nonetheless, Professor McGonagall replied. 1 week's detention, Mr. Barley. And as for you, Mr. Lupin, as this is your very last month at school, I don't see that detention will be very effective. This was not a relief to Remus. She was still smiling, which meant she knew exactly how best to punish him, and he wasn't going to like it.
Give me detention if you want, he said quickly.
McGonagall chuckled, shaking her head. No, I think I have just the thing. With Mr. Lockhart out of commission, I believe we have a vacancy open for Quidditch commentator. Remus practically felt the colour drain out of his face. That woman was clearly an evil mastermind. Anything but that. Over McGonagall's shoulder, Lily grinned. James and Sirius thought the whole thing was hilarious, of course, after they'd finished cursing Lockhart's name. They loved the idea of Remus, who knew as much about Quidditch as he knew about football or quantum physics, having to commentate their final match.
I just won't do it, Remus kept saying. I'll just sit there with my mouth shut. There's nothing they can do. Don't be ridiculous, Sirius nudged him. You need to sing our praises.
It's really about following the quaffle, James said. If you can keep your eye on that, you'll be fine. Oi, a spare fork for the beaters, Marlene called. And the keeper, Yasmin added. Peter was less encouraging and spent the rest of the evening sulking in the corner, brooding over his chess set.
I'm sorry, Pete,
Remus tried him after hours of silent treatment.
I know you'd have liked to do it, but remember, this is punishment for me.
I'd have been really good at it too, Peter muttered, arms folded against his chest. I know everything about the team. You haven't even watched any of the practices.
I know, you would have been amazing, Remus assured him. Will you help me?
Help? Peter looked up cautiously. Help how?
Get me up to speed,
Remus encouraged.
Give me your notes for once.
Yeah, I suppose I could do that.
I'll even ask McGonagall if you can sit with me in the commentator's box, so if I balls it up, then you can set me right again.
Okay, Peter nodded, enthusiastic now. Yeah, you'll need to know loads. I'll start right now, Moony. I won't let you down. In the end, Peter produced more notes on the 1978 Gryffindor versus Slytherin final than he'd ever for any of his lessons. There were reams and reams of parchment with labelled diagrams, lists of players and their numbers, flying formations, and a detailed explanation of what seemed to be the Quidditch equivalent of the offside rule. He'd even written a little script of phrases Remus could use if he got stuck. So, even after Remus's arithmancy exam was over, he was pretty confident he'd done a perfect job on that, it'd been a piece of cake, he now had another test to study for. Still, nothing could prepare him for how it felt now, sitting in a high tower above the pitch, a sea of red and green-robed students beneath him, waiting for him to speak. He felt queasy and wished he hadn't eaten such a large breakfast. He'd also had a shot of fire whiskey, courtesy of James, and half a joint with Mary before the game started, hoping that might calm his nerves. Unfortunately, it seemed to have had the opposite effects, and Sirius's extremely unhelpful advice of picture everyone in their underwear had got stuck in his head, so now Remus didn't know where to look. Mr. Lupin, McGonagall said again. Are you ready? Remus looked down at Peter's notes, shuffling them. He swallowed and nodded. Peter had very neat handwriting, nice and round, but Remus's head was a bit foggy now. The whiskey had sharpened him up at first, but that combined with the spliff was making him feel a bit dopey and warm. He pinched the inside of his wrist for some clarity. Mr. Lupin, McGonagall whispered, pushing the microphone toward him. "The players are on the pitch."
"Oh, sorry."
He blinked, startled, peering down at the grass below and clearing his throat. He read carefully from the parchment in front of him.
"Hello, welcome, everyone, to the Hogwarts Quidditch Cup Final, 1978.
His voice sounded weird, echoing across the oval stadium, but he could hear cheers go up as he spoke, which gave him quite a bit of courage. He glanced at McGonagall, who smiled and nodded encouragingly. Remus returned his focus to the ground below and tried to give a bit of commentary.
"Right, so here we go. The teams are on the pitch. That's Gryffindor in red, Captain James Potter, and Slytherin in green, Captain Carenza Smith. Not a lot to say, really, until they're all up."
He looked down at Peter's notes again. Introduce players and their strengths.
"Oh, okay, so the players. Well, obviously James. He's the chaser. He's pretty good, I'm told. He's the one who told me."
A smatter of laughter from the crowd. Remus grinned, then swallowed and continued.
Gryffindor keeper, Yasmin Patel, also very good. I suppose, as far as I know, I'm no expert. Sirius Black and Marlene McKinnon, beaters. Good beaters, The whole team's really good. Let's just say that."
He heard Peter groan sitting behind him and a titter of laughter from the crowd. McGonagall was giving him a cynical look, but all he could do was shrug helplessly at her and list off the Slytherin players with equal ineptitude. He did, however, take great pleasure in announcing Slytherin's seeker Reggie Black. He was sure Regulus's shoulders would cringe at that.
"Oh, great. Looks like we're about to start,"
Remus continued, settling into it now.
"Yep, there goes the whistles, and, no surprise here, Potter is in possession of the quaffle. Blimey, he's fast. Look at him go. And, it's a goal. 10-0 to Gryffindor. Nice one, Prongs."
The crowd cheered and James zoomed across the pitch, arms raised high in victory. He threw a thumbs up at Remus as he flew past the commentator's tower, then high-fived Sirius mid-air before returning his focus to the game. This wasn't so bad, Remus thought. All he had to do was watch what happened and then just say it out loud. An idiot could do it.
"Slytherin now in possession of the quaffle. I think it's Timothy Bulstrode. Yep, okay. Not as fast as James, is he? Never mind, he's nearly there. Oh, no, blocked by a bludger there from McKinnon. Well done, Marlene, that looked like it hurt."
"Mr. Lupin, a little less bias, if you please."
"Sorry, Professor. Okay, so Potter's back in possession. He passes it to Erickson. Erickson's really flying. She's almost... Oh, bugger. Slytherin back in possession."
"Language, Mr. Lupin."
"Sorry. Bulstrode heading for the goalpost now. Oh, come on. Even I'm faster than that. He shoots and... Blocked by Gryffindor keeper Patel. See, told you she was good."
Cheers went up from one side of the crowd, boos from the other. Yaz did a victory loop, beaming, and Sirius flew past the commentator's box, grinning at Remus as he did so. Remus had to admit, Quidditch was more exciting than he remembered.
Erickson back in possession of the quaffle now, passes it to Potter. Potter's charging up the pitch. "See, Bulstrode? That's how you bloody fly." "Sorry, Professor. Goal! 20-0 to Gryffindor."
"Regulus!" Peter squeaked behind Remus, his finger pointing over Remus's shoulder at the green-robed younger black brother, who was now flying very fast indeed, a look of concentration on his face as he zoomed toward an empty square of sky.
"Looks like Slytherin seeker Black might have seen the snitch,"
Remus said, hurrying into the microphone, hoping that the Gryffindor seeker was listening.
"Yep, he's definitely seen something. He's speeding up. He's... bad luck. Blocked by a bludger there from Gryffindor beater Black."
Remus grinned and could have sworn Sirius threw him a wink from across the pitch. Regulus, who'd had to break and dive very suddenly, looked furious, as did the rest of the Slytherin team. Things turned quite nasty after that, both in the game and Remus's commentary.
"Erickson's got the quaffle again. Is she going to pass it to Potter?" "No, she's going to try for a goal herself." "Come on, Erickson." "Oh, flipping hell. That was uncalled for." Erickson hit by a bludger from Avery. Slytherin, and Not now has possession. Erickson looks dazed. Is she... No, that's a thumbs up. Good girl.
Mr. Lupin, the match, if you please.
Right, so Not's got the quaffle, he shoots, 10 points to Slytherin, but it's still Gryffindor's game. Potter has the quaffle, he's flying, he's nearly there, Shit! Watch out, James!
Carenza Smith, the Slytherin beater, was flying at full speed directly into James's side and was knocked out of the way in the last few seconds by Marlene, who full body slammed right into the Slytherin captain.
Bloody hell! Remus yelled. Nicely done, McKinnon. That girl is brutal. Oh, come on, Hooch, that's got to be a penalty for Gryffindor. Get off your arse and referee the sodding match. Oh, it looks like little Reggie Black has his eye on the snitch again.
Mr. Lupin, McGonagall snapped again. I shall take the microphone away.
Be my guest,
he offered, grinning at her. She shook her head, tutting. Remus returned to the game.
So we're now, what is it? Right, 60-20 to Gryffindor. Just goes to show that cheating isn't going to pay off. I hope you're listening, Black. I meant the younger Black, obviously.
Remus, Peter hissed behind him. Calm down. You're supposed to be giving a balanced... Oh, Merlin.
Bugger Christ, that was close,
Remus yelled as Regulus and the Gryffindor Seeker both reached for the snitch at the same time, only for it to dart tantalizingly out of reach, sending both players careening into the stands, Regulus pulling up just a bit quicker than the Gryffindor Seeker, both of them miraculously staying on their brooms.
Remus,
Peter whispered again. Slytherin just scored.
They what? Shit! Sorry, folks. Slytherin scored again. Must have missed that one.
Remus apologized to the baying crowd, half of them laughing, the other half now booing him.
Won't happen again, he assured them cheerily. Right, Potter, back in possession of the quaffle, dodges a bludger from Avery there. Jesus, this game is violent. Black, the good one, catches up with the bludger and aims it at... Yes, Regulus Black once again has to dodge. Luckily, he's so used to weaseling his way out of trouble, eh?
Detention, Lupin, McGonagall was muttering. You'll be in detention for the rest of your school career.
Fuck me!
Remus yelled into the microphone as Sirius and Marlene both fired bludgers at the Slytherin beater, tailing Regulus, forcing her to swoop so low she almost hit the ground.
Completely mental, Remus gaped. I seriously have no idea why anyone plays this. But fair play, it's distracted Regulus enough to... Wait! Yes! Bloody yes, that's Gryffindor with the snitch! We bloody won! Oh my god, thank fuck for that! I really...
That's enough! McGonagall snatched the microphone from him finally. He grinned at her again, too elated with the victory to care much about getting into trouble. Peter was jumping up and down behind him too, which didn't help.
Sorry, he started.
I'm absolutely shocked, McGonagall said sternly. I expect this kind of behaviour from Black, but I don't expect it from a former prefect. I expect a letter of apology to the Slytherin team and to Madam Hooch.
Yes, Professor.
Remus hung his head and tried to look sorry, but he couldn't help his lips twitching a bit. He couldn't wait to see Sirius. He'd run all the way to the changing rooms if his hip and inhibitions would let him. Fortunately, if there was anything McGonagall loved better than enforcing school rules, it was Gryffindor winning at Quidditch. After the celebrations have finished, of course, she said.
Thanks, Professor.
Remus looked up, beaming again. Honestly, she laughed, shaking her head, you've never reminded me more of Lyle. Compliment or insult, Remus didn't care. For once, even a mention of his father couldn't touch Remus's good mood. Chapter 149, 7th Year, Legacy, Part 1.
You could nick it. Bet it wouldn't be hard, Sirius said, standing beside Remus in front of the trophy case. Just vanish the glass for a second.
Professor Flitwick would notice.
Remus raised an eyebrow, distracted now by Sirius's ghostly reflection in the glass.
Or one of the Ravenclaws.
Nah. The other boy caught his eye and grinned at him, teeth pearly white.
No one'll miss it.
I think, Remus replied, licking his lips and returning his gaze to the little gold figure on top of the trophy.
Lyle would have preferred it to stay put. That way there's always a piece of him at Hogwarts. Ugh, have you gone all soppy because it's the last week?
Sirius teased him. Remus smiled, unperturbed.
Yeah, a bit.
Sirius chuckled and leaned toward him confidentially.
Me too.
Remus pulled a face at him.
Come on then, I'm hungry. Lunch.
They both set off down the corridor toward the Great Hall. Aside from Remus's streak of detentions following the Quidditch final, they'd all had a very relaxing week with nothing to do but plan for the future, which of course meant that they had absolutely done no planning for the future.
We're not leaving anything behind,
Remus said thoughtfully as they walked.
Eh?
Sirius asked, distracted by a group of girls who'd walked past, giggling. Remus flicked his ear.
Ow! They were looking at you, Remus. Fuck me, we won, Lupin. What were you saying? We won't leave anything behind. Like Lyle's trophy. James and I are on the Quidditch Cup. Prongs is head boy. Doesn't that get recorded anywhere? And Peter won that chess tournament. Oh yeah. Must just be me then.
Remus sighed forlorn.
There's the Whomping Willow?
Sirius tried. Remus just scowled at him. Well, he supposed, that's what you get for trying not to be noticed. He remained contemplative throughout lunch, which was fish and chips, with a choice of mushy or whole peas. Remus experimented with a combination of both. All right there, Moony, James asked between mouthfuls. You're very quiet.
He's worrying about his legacy, Sirius announced. He wants a trophy. Shut up, no I don't,
Remus blushed. If you ask me, that match commentary deserved a medal. Special services to the school, Mary laughed. You can't go anywhere in the castle without hearing someone shout, "Buggering Christ, that was close!" It was brilliant. Remus grinned, feeling a bit better. He'd been quietly enjoying his 15 minutes of fame and had received enough gifts of cigarettes and chocolates to see him through the summer, which was just as well, he supposed, because in a few short months he'd have to start supporting himself. Don't worry, Remu. If you know what goes off without a hitch on Friday, James whispered, leaning in, then no one will forget us in a hurry.
I thought the point was that no one knew who did it, Remus quirked an eyebrow.
Oh, come on, Lily scoffed, and she had a point. Still, Remus couldn't help but be a bit troubled. He didn't want his only monument to be the Whomping Willow of the godforsaken shack. How do ghosts happen? He asked thoughtfully, watching nearly headless Nick drift by, chatting with Fat Friar.
Merlin, Moony, cheer the fuck up,
Sirius groaned, mouthful of chips.
You have to be dead to become a ghost, and I suppose you'd have to die here too, on school grounds.
Remus shrugged. Dying at Hogwarts didn't seem very likely, unless something dire was going to happen in the next few days.
A portrait, then, he said. Actually, no, I don't want to be able to talk to myself. That's creepy.
They're really expensive, too, James said. Our family never bothered.
Typical Potters,
Sirius said haughtily. His plate now clean, he set the knife and fork neatly at its centre, and it soon vanished.
Of course, the blacks are all preserved for posterity in the family gallery. Even you?
Remus glanced at him.
Not me, Sirius shook his head with a small smile. I wasn't there when I came of age. I expect Reggie's gonna been done now, though. More fool him.
Remus! Marlene came running up to the dining table. She looked flushed and excited.
Yeah?
Remus sat up straight, looking up at her expectantly. Can I see you for a minute? I've got something for you. She was hopping from foot to foot, clearly eager to tell him something.
Okay.
Remus glanced round nervously. He didn't like surprises, but he trusted Marlene for now, and she seemed so happy. Come with me! She grabbed his hand and pulled him up.
Should I?
Sirius started, but Marlene shook her head. It's private. Come on, Remus! She practically dragged him from the hall, apparently not caring he would miss pudding now.
Slow down, will you?
He panted, feeling his hip click as they began to traverse the first flight of stairs.
Sorry, I'm just so excited to show you.
Show me what?
It's private! He sighed and just focused on trying to keep up with her. Sometimes Remus felt he spent his whole life being dragged round the castle by people who were more athletic than him. When they reached Gryffindor Common Room, Remus looked at her expectantly, and she suddenly turned shy, chewing her thumbnail.
What?
He said.
Not private enough?
He gestured about the empty room. Everyone else was at dinner, probably enjoying their pudding. Hadn't had apple crumble in ages. It would be just Remus's luck if they were serving it today and he missed out. I think we better go to your dorm, Marlene said, setting off again. Just in case. Jesus Christ, Miles, what's this about? Remus followed her up the stairs. Oh, I've finally decided I fancy blokes, so I've lured you up here to seduce you, she casually threw over her shoulder. You spend too much time with Mary, he returned dryly. Once they were in the bedroom, she closed the door and Remus went to sit on his bed, his legs sore. She looked round furtively. Why are there only 3 beds in here? Acceptance testing for the prank went a bit wrong, Remus shrugged. Marlene just shook her head like an overindulgent mother. She reached into the pocket of her robes and pulled out a small, shallow jar and held it out to Remus. Trousers off, she said. Excuse me? It's for your hip. She unscrewed the jar excitedly, her eyes bright and eager. I made it for you and Danny tested it and everything. What does it do? He peered into the pot warily. Whatever was inside looked like Vaseline, semi-transparent with a thick, goopy consistency. I thought about what you said about how a mixture of muggle and magical medicine works best, she explained. So I did some experimenting. I tried valerian and comfrey and turmeric. Turns out that ginger worked best. Who would have thought? Then just combined it with the right amount of anti-inflammatory poultice and some dittany for extra strength. Go on, rub it on. Okay, Remus said, taking the jar and walking into the bathroom, locking the door behind him. He held it in his hands for a while, sniffing the contents. It smelled like ginger, which was fairly pleasant, and not too strong. You shouldn't need that much, Marlene called through the door, making him jump and retreat as far into the bathroom as he could. Just smooth it over your skin on the sore area. Okay, he replied croakily. This was weird, but he owed it to Marlene to try, if this was a peace offering. He unbuckled his trousers and pulled them down to his thigh, underwear and all. Then, balancing the jar carefully on the side of the bath, he scooped out a small dollop of the concoction, about the size of a grape, with his fingers and carefully rubbed it onto his bare skin. It was tingly at first and then began to grow warm, but not unpleasantly so. He could feel it seeping into his skin, down into the joints and gristle and bone, warming and soothing as it went. It was a feeling he'd long forgotten. It was relief. Marlene, he shouted. What, are you okay? She called anxiously. If you still want to seduce me, he replied, I'd probably do anything you asked me to right now. He heard her sniggering on the other side of the door. It works then? It's a bloody miracle. It's bloody magic, you silly git, she replied. Come out then. He hurriedly pulled his trousers back up and fastened them, striding over to the door and opening it, not so much as a twinge. His hip had bothered him for so long now he could barely remember what it felt like to walk without being conscious of his limitations. He beamed at Marlene, grabbed her round the waist and spun her round. Thank you, he said over and over. She squealed. Lupin, you lunatic, let me go. He kissed her on the cheek and put her down. You're a lot stronger than you look, she laughed, blushing, tucking her hair back behind her ear. Oh, I'm so glad it worked. I wanted to ask Madame Pomfrey to help so many times, but I thought you'd rather I kept it to myself. Thank you, he said again. You're amazing. I wish I had some way to pay you back. You have? She shook her head. You helped Danny, even though you've never met him, and you knew how dangerous it was. And you helped me in the end too. I know what I want to do now. We're going to win this war, and when it's over, I'm going to start doing some proper research into lycanthropy. You know, set up real clinics so people can get the help they need. If anyone else can see what I see in you and my brother, then maybe, I don't know, maybe things can get better. She was looking at her feet bashfully as she said this, but Remus couldn't stop grinning, shifting from foot to foot just to prove to himself it didn't hurt. Nothing hurt. He had to tell Sirius. You're going to be an incredible healer, Miles. He hugged her again. Can I keep this? He went back to the bathroom for the jar, holding it up. Course you can, she nodded vigorously. I don't know how long the effects last. If you wouldn't mind making a note of it each time you reapply, it'll be useful to know. Yeah, anything, he replied, carefully screwing the cap back on. I'd better go and find Yaz. She got no idea where I've been all day.
I told her it was to do with a prank, but I don't think she believes me. They're down in the common room, the lot of them. They just got back from dinner, Remus replied offhandedly, still staring at the jar in awe. How on earth could you know that? He glanced up awkwardly. Good sense of smell. Like, really good. Her eyes widened and she shook her head solemnly. I've got so much to learn. Come on, he laughed, patting her shoulder. One thing at a time.
Sirius was a true gentleman when Remus told him the good news about Marlene's poultice and did not say, I told you so, even once. He was too happy listening to Remus babble about how much better he felt.
I don't know what I ever did,
Remus sighed after they had gone to bed later that night.
What do you mean?
Sirius yawned.
You know, you learnt Lenticular Magna for me all the way back in first year, and Lily made me that reading aid, and you and Peter and Prongs all became animagi just so you could spend time with me. What's your point? I don't know what I did,
Remus replied, shrugging.
To earn any of that. Moony,
Sirius gave him a funny look.
You're doing that thing again. Huh? We're your friends. Friends help each other. As if you haven't done things for Lily and Marlene and Wormtail and James and me. Merlin, me, more than anyone. I know,
Remus replied, still smiling.
I know, I just suppose I feel so lucky. You are soppy these days,
Sirius smirked, folding his arms behind his head.
Is this what it's going to be like living with you? And I always thought you were such a tough nut. Still tougher than you?
Remus glanced at him sideways. Sirius's eyes were closed, but he was smiling. Now seemed as good a time as any.
Do you really want to live with me?
Remus asked.
Course I do,
Sirius replied, eyes still closed.
I mean, not just with James's parents, in our own place.
Sirius opened his eyes.
Obviously, that's the plan, isn't it? Aye.
Remus fumbled for the right words. He was very comfortable around Sirius now,
feeling he could say just about anything.
But sometimes it was still the same old struggle.
I wasn't sure. You know I haven't got much money. And you know I'm rolling in it,
Sirius shrugged, making the bedsheets crinkle.
What's mine is yours. I don't want you worrying about boring crap like that. It's only boring to you because you've never had to think about it. Well, now you don't have to think about it either, okay? Okay,
Remus nodded. Something to revisit later, maybe, when there wasn't a war looming and they could have conversations about normal, everyday things. For now, if they weren't talking about the war, Sirius preferred daydreams. Remus settled back.
Where shall we live, then? London,
Sirius said firmly.
Muggle London. In a big house?
No, Sirius shook his head, frowning a bit.
I don't like big houses. Too many empty rooms. If it's just the two of us, we don't need all that space.
This was a remarkably sensible decision, but Remus didn't say anything. He understood. But if they were being sensible...
I want you to meet Hope,
he said. Sirius opened his eyes again.
What? She's dying,
Remus said matter-of-factly.
Lung cancer, a thing Muggles get. Anyway, it can't be cured, and I don't think she has more than a year. Moony, I'm sorry. I had no idea. It's okay, Remus replied. I've known since the first time I've met her. I've known I wouldn't have long. She's not perfect, but she cares about me. I want her to see that I have someone, that I'm not alone. Moony. I know,
Remus laughed.
I'm being soppy. No.
Sirius reached over and laid his hand softly on Remus's chest.
That's just one of the nicest things I've ever heard.
Remus turned his head too, and they looked at each other for a bit, both smiling in the shadowy darkness of the quiet night. When his eyes began to prick, Remus laughed again, looking away.
Christ, he said. Listen to us. We're worse than Potter and Evans. Don't tell anyone, Sirius laughed, wiping his eyes quickly. Only 3 days of school left. We've got reputations to maintain.
Chapter 150. 7th Year. Legacy. Part 2.
We got lucky with the weather, Remus commented, gazing up at the clear blue sky. Would have been a nightmare getting them all outside if it was raining. He was not going to miss Scottish summers. He and Christopher were alone in the owlery, waiting. It would begin at any moment. Don't make fun of me, Christopher whispered, looking down at the grounds from the high open windows. But this is about the most exciting thing I've ever done. Remus smiled at him fondly and gave his hand a quick squeeze. I bet you this is just the beginning. You're going to do so many exciting things. I know it. I don't know, it's going to be so quiet with you lot gone, Chris replied, peering down at the lawn below them. I bet they make Regulus head boy. Oh, that's a signal! A fountain of golden sparks shot up from behind the greenhouses, and Remus could hear Christopher's heart begin to beat faster with the excitement. Let's do it then, Remus elbowed him. They both turned to look at the owls, hundreds of them perched in rows lining the tower walls, all the way up into the rafters. Beside them was a pile of letters, all blank except the address, and they had all the same address. Chris looked like he was ready to burst from the thrill of it all, and Remus stepped back, giving him the floor. You know the spell, you do it. Really? Yeah, Remus grinned. Plenty of mischief to go around after this. Okay. He rolled up his sleeves, licking his lips. He uttered the incantation and swept his wand broadly around the tower. A low hoot, a ruffling of feathers, and then utter chaos as all 500 owls suddenly leapt from their perches and swooped down toward the two boys, who both ducked for cover. Remus had never seen anything so magnificent. Every single owl in Hogwarts spread its wings and soared out of the window, each one snatching a blank addressed letter as it passed. It must have taken 2 full minutes for them all to manage it, and when it was over, Remus and Christopher jumped at the window to watch them disappear down toward the courtyard, through the arches and on to their destination. Wow! Chris kept saying like a yappy little dog. Wow, wow, wow! Remus just grinned and thought about James and Sirius elsewhere in the castle, watching for that signal, and Mary and Marlene and Yaz, poised and ready for their own part, and everyone else in the castle waiting for the thing that they'd been planning since Christmas. Let's go, Remus said, grabbing Chris's arm. We can watch them all running out. If 500 owls suddenly started flocking to the dungeons didn't get everyone out, then Remus was confident that James and Sirius's patented exploding toilet seats would do the job. They ran down the spiral staircase together, Remus taking the steps 2 at a time, still relishing his newfound mobility, and onto the main corridor, where pandemonium reigned supreme. Every portrait was singing at the top of its lungs, from Muggle pop songs to wizard nursery rhymes, whatever the third years had fancies when they cast the spell, Remus assumed. The suits of armour had left their posts and taken to following students around. Remus hoped that wasn't too menacing. They weren't actually doing anything after all, just mimicking movements. It had been James's idea, king of locomotion spells. I did it, Remus, I did it! A 4th-year Ravenclaw came running out of the nearest bathroom, followed by a mass of pink bubbles. Blew it right up! Well done! Remus clapped him on the back, congratulating him. I can't wait for the big finish! Better hurry, Remus advised. Won't be long. The 4th-year nodded and set off toward the grounds, pink foam flooding out into the hall. You've taught so many people things they never would have learned, Christopher marvelled as they walked. The big clock outside the great hall was whirring madly, hands spinning. So was every other clock, if the 6-year spell had worked correctly. Oh yeah, Remus snorted. Blowing up toilets and levitating desks. Very useful. Don't forget all the defensive stuff, Christopher frowned. I'd have been confounded again if not for you. They followed the steady stream of students exiting the building. Remus just hoped they'd caused enough mayhem in enough areas of the castle to get everyone outside onto the lawn. It wouldn't be any fun if half the school missed the main event. How is Lockhart? He asked casually. Fine, I think. Leaving me alone, anyway. Good. Suppose you can handle him if he doesn't. Yeah. They'd reached the courtyard now and were within sight of the grounds. Christopher squinted in the bright summer sunshine and looked up at Remus, stopping a moment. I'll really miss you, though. You're only here 1 more year, Remus replied. You'll be too busy with any WTs to think about anyone else. Trust me.
No, I'm still going to miss you, Chris said firmly. I'll keep the study group going, but it won't be the same. Everyone likes you so much. You're patient with them. Remus didn't know how to respond to that, so he didn't. There was a funny lump in his throat all the same. Come on, he pulled Christopher's arm, moving toward the grounds. Don't want to miss it. More than half the school had gathered on Hogwarts' expansive lawn, all chattering a mile a minute about the various interruptions and intrusions to their mornings. Did you see those owls? The Great Hall is flooded! Flooded! That Ravenclaw door knocker is speaking gobbledygook. Apparently it won't let anyone in. The statue of the knight on the 5th floor threw water balloons at me. Marauders, do you reckon? Definitely. No, I saw Remeline Vance casting a spell on the portraits and a group of Sixiers planting tug bombs. It can't be the Marauders. Well, it can't be everyone. The conjecture was interrupted as the last of the Slytherins, Regulus, Barty Crouch, Mulciber and Snape, much to Remus's satisfaction, emerged from the castle. They were all plastered in green slime. Lily's surprise bogey bombs had worked a treat. Remus made a mental note to congratulate her. She'd be a marauder yet. You! Snape came charging over, globs of pea-green ooze dripping from his hair, from the tip of his nose. He pointed a long finger at Remus, face contorted with rage. You did this. You and your filthy little friends. What's the matter, Snivellus? Remus asked coolly, holding his ground. You don't look any different to me. You! Snape spluttered, laughter erupting around him as younger students gathered to see. Scourgify! Regulus cast a cleansing charm on himself, restoring his clothes and hair to their usual impeccable neatness. He gave Snape a bored look. Have some decorum, Severus. Don't rise to their pathetic bait. Hey, Prongs! Look, they got Snivellus! Sirius appeared through the crowd, grinning, followed by James and Peter. Excellent! It's a good look, if you want my opinion, James smirked, patting Remus on the shoulder by way of greeting. At the sight of Sirius, Regulus rolled his eyes and walked away, joining a group of Slytherins near the edge of the lake, huddled together, muttering between themselves like a murder of crows. When Dumbledore finds out you're behind this, he'll... Snape raged. What? Sirius cocked an eyebrow, leaning on James's shoulder casually, as though they were just chatting. Expel us? On the last day of school? You'll pay, Snape snarled. He turned and began to stalk back to the school, his robe still dripping. Slow down, Snively, Peter called out, hardly able to contain his excitement. You don't want to miss the grand finale. Wormtail, Sirius hissed, kicking his shin. Shh! Come on, it's nearly time, Remus said, trying to draw them all away from Snape. He was obviously about to lose it, and Remus didn't trust the others not to push him over the edge. Worryingly, they ended up quite close to Regulus and his clique by the lake, but it was getting crowded and there weren't many places to stand. Remus had never been one for public displays of affection, but he really wished he could hold Sirius's hand right then, if only to stop him doing anything stupid. No such luck. Reggie boy! Sirius nodded at his brother pleasantly, eyes glittering with mischief. Sirius, Regulus replied, facing forward, head held high. He was like an alabaster statue, a cold marble version of his hot-blooded sibling. I had hoped you'd learn to put these childish games behind you, Regulus drawled, sounding bored as ever. Silly pranks and schemes won't be of any use to you once the war is won. The Dark Lord demands order. Sod your stupid old Dark Lord, Sirius tutted, folding his arms. Remus realized the two brothers were mirroring each other's body language. All round the lake, students were gathering. They were seconds away. Remus took the opportunity to glance about at the most familiar faces. There was Christopher, talking animatedly to a few of his six-year friends, no doubt retelling what he'd done in the owlry. Mary, Marlene and Yaz were giggling between themselves, and a bit further along was Emmeline Vance, still a perfect ice maiden, flirting with poor old Roman Rotherhide. A gaggle of younger students from the study group were practicing the incantation they were about to perform, and beside Remus, Lily and James were holding hands, wands at the ready. With a great clang, the Hogwarts clock tower struck midday, and James gave off a loud whistle, commanding everyone's attention. It was now. It seemed to Remus that they were all holding their breath for a few beats, and he gripped his own wand tighter, throwing a quick grin at Sirius before turning his attention back to the lake, and what lay beneath. All working as one, the members of the Marauders Inter-House Pranking Collective raised their wands and gathered their strength, shouting, "Atolo Magna!" Remus's knees weakened.
They'd tested it a few times, just the 4 of them in their bedroom,
hence Sirius's vanishing bed, but never with so many others, never so much magic at once. He felt as though he'd stuck his wand into a beehive. The magic began to thrum and vibrate through him, filling his mouth and nostrils like battery acid and pooling deep inside. Power. He was giddy with it, practically drunk. He shook his head doggishly, trying to maintain his focus and hold on. He had no idea what would happen if he let go. Meanwhile, something was happening on the lake. The surface began to ripple and shimmer. An odd groaning, creaking sound came from a mile below, and then pop! With almost comical immediacy, the spell had worked. Remus felt a great twist inside himself, which was not unpleasant, but not ignorable either, causing him to gasp. They'd done it. Students began to laugh and point. The Slytherins were crying out, one by one, stupid with shock. Even Regulus's mouth had dropped open. There, hovering just meters above the still waters, directly over the dungeons, hovered every bed and trunk from the Slytherin dormitories. It was beautiful, absolutely perfect in every way. The layout of each dorm had been preserved. All they'd had to do was transport everything a mile or so upward. The barrier charm, soft-hearted Lily's idea, was working well too, meaning that no one's possessions were really in danger of getting wet. They'd just have to work out the counterspell, and everything would return to normal, provided all of the Slytherins worked together, of course. That had been a Hufflepuff idea. Remus's muscles were still twitching from channeling all that magic. He was a live wire. Static buzzed at his fingertips. Luckily, very few people noticed. They were too busy cheering or screaming with dismay at the sight before them. Fireworks were floating at the tops of the beds now, spelling out, "Have a great summer, Slytherin, from Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff." "Are you okay, Moony?" Sirius looked at him, reaching an arm out. "Don't touch me!" Remus snapped, stepping back and shrugging Sirius off hurriedly. He didn't know what would happen, but he didn't feel at all safe to be around. Sirius rubbed his own arm, looking hurt. "Sorry," Remus breathed, shaking his head again. Just give me a minute." "You!" Oh no. Severus had reappeared and was charging toward the Marauders, wand raised, red-faced. It looked like he'd got off most of the slime. "Thieves!" he hissed, glaring at James and Sirius. "Give me my things back! Get them down at once!" James and Sirius were beside themselves with laughter, which didn't help matters, but Snape really had brought this on himself. No one else was ranting and raving like a lunatic. Lily tried to intervene, breaking away from James. "Severus, it's not what you think. It's easy enough to—" But it was too late. Snape had already turned to the lake and aimed his wand at whichever bed was his. He was trying a basic levitation spell, but it wasn't going to work. The Marauders had designed the spell specifically to ward off against that kind of measure.
"No, don't!"
Lily yelled, covering her eyes. But of course Snape never listened, not when he felt he'd been wronged. It seemed to work for a moment, only one of the beds jerked for a bit and wobbled, but only for a microsecond. The next thing anyone knew, it had come loose, plummeting into the sparkling waters below with a loud splash. Severus stared, his mean mouth a hard straight line, dark greasy hair falling into his eyes. He turned, wand raised, and Remus caught a scent he had only recognized twice before, like charred flesh. Dark magic. A curse. Another twist in his gut, this time far less pleasant, and Remus felt a change inside him. "Sectum Sempra!" Snape cried. Remus didn't even need his wand. He had more than enough power, and without thinking about it, stepped in front of James, raising his wand as Severus flung the curse. The world seemed to take on a strange red hue, and wind roared in Remus's ears, that he only faintly heard Lily scream and James and Sirius shout, "Moony!" The curse hit Remus, but he felt nothing. It seemed to simply dissipate as soon as it touched his skin, leaving him with nothing worse than a feeling of mild sunburn. Still, he was weaker now than he had been 2 minutes ago, as if the force of the barrier he'd created had zapped him of all his other magic. He blinked and everything came back to normal. Snape was still standing in front of him, looking terrified and furious in equal measure. Sirius's hand was on Remus's arm, and James was now charging towards Snape. Remus sank slowly to the grass below, exhausted. He sat cross-legged on the ground, dazed. Sirius crouched beside him. "Moony?" "I'm okay." "What the fuck was that?" Sirius whispered urgently. He sounded scared. I don't know," Remus whispered back, bowing his head. "It was just a counter-jinx!" Lily suddenly shouted, and Remus realized she was addressing the students that had gathered round, curious. Always quick on her feet, that girl. "Snape tried to curse Potter. You all saw it. Lupin caught it just in time." "Can you get up?" Sirius was asking, tugging at his elbow. "We'll go to Madame Pomfrey." "No." Remus shook his head fiercely, getting up. "I'm okay, honestly. Just surprised myself. Wordless magic or something. I haven't got the hang of it." "Okay." Sirius was looking at him warily. Lily was on crowd control, and James seemed to have chased Snape away, or else he'd gone to Slughorn to formally complain about the prank. Equilibrium restored itself. Remus gave Sirius his best smile, and gave his arm a gentle squeeze to show it was all okay now. Sirius relaxed a bit, nodding. The older Slytherins, a bit further along the lake, were now conferring amongst themselves. It seemed that Snape's misfortune had benefited his housemates. At least now they knew what wouldn't work. "Sort of nice, isn't it?" Mary sauntered over, smiling broadly and completely oblivious to what had just happened. "See them all employing a bit of teamwork. Might have house unity yet." "Don't count on it," Marlene smirked just behind her. The Slytherins had begun to argue. They all stayed to watch the drama unfold a little longer. One particularly hilarious attempt to restore order resulted in every bed lifting a few feet higher. Another spell caused them all to face west for no discernible reason. After an hour had passed, a few Ravenclaws took an interest and began workshopping more ideas with the desperate Slytherins. At that point, Remus was feeling normal again, which only meant one thing. "I'm hungry," he announced. "Feast'll be in a half hour," Lily said, distracted by the squid, who was playing with one of the Slytherins' bedside tables, trying to bat it with its longest tentacle. "I might go up and get changed then," Mary said. Everyone agreed. Leave the Slytherins to it. As they walked back up to the castle, grinning and laughing together, Remus was aware of Sirius's eyes still on him, but he couldn't offer any explanation. Whatever had happened had only occurred once before, that afternoon in the forest with Castor and Livia, and that was hardly a pleasant memory for either him or Sirius. "Oi, Black," Marlene said, appearing beside them. "Ever get your bed back?" Sirius frowned. "No, I never did. Long gone. Though I suppose it's probably seeking its fortune on the open road. Godspeed, old bed," he sighed wistfully. Remus sniggered. "Aren't you worried the school would charge you for it?" Marlene said. He shrugged. Marlene tutted. "Spoiled brat." "Did you ever even try to get it back?" Lily asked. "Well, we don't know where it went," James replied, chuckling at the memory. "Not even a basic summoning charm?" "No, we never—" "Accio bed!" Sirius yelled at the top of his lungs, waving his wand. A faint and distant rumble. "Oh, shit," Sirius muttered. The lake behind them began to bubble, and they all turned in time to see Sirius's four-poster bed rising from the water like a great mahogany submarine. Draped in seaweed and heavy waterlogged velvet hangings, it rose into the air and flew toward them so that they had to scatter and dive to the ground, covering their heads. It crashed on the spot Sirius had summoned it to, with a heavy, squelchy thud, and promptly split it into several pieces. Silence for a few seconds as Lily, Marlene, Mary, Yaz, James, Peter, Remus, and Sirius raised their heads once more, climbing to their feet in amazement, then laughter from every quarter, especially the Slytherins still gathered by the lake's edge. Sirius just stood there, scratching his head. He said.
Bottom of the lake all along, eh?
It was still dripping. The sheets were green with algae and sand and grit piled up on the mattress. Oi, you wanker! James said, approaching the rescued bed and snatching up a rectangular pile of greyish mulch. Is this my Quidditch magazine?
Maybe,
Sirius grinned, then, catching the murderous glint in James's eye, began to run at full pelt back toward the castle, James chasing after him. I suppose now is as good a time as any, Peter whispered to Remus. But, Filch caught me with the map earlier. He confiscated it.
What?
Remus rounded on him, angry. The map was his idea, his magic. Don't be angry with me, Moony, Peter cringed. It was locked and everything, I promise. No one can get into it unless they're up to no good, and they'd have to break into Filch's office. Remus stopped at these words. He was right about that. After all, anyone who could achieve both those feats would certainly be worthy of the map, and he had wanted to leave something behind, a true legacy. This way, perhaps Messrs. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs might be remembered. One day. He squinted ahead at the two dark-haired boys chasing each other and whooping with laughter. He looked at the four girls who all linked arms and were walking cheerfully back to the castle, voices light and carefree. What did Remus Lupin have to be angry about? What did he have to worry about? His heart swelled, and he was reminded of something Sirius had told him a few months ago. Love was something you did, not something you said, and every one of these people had proved that to him.
All right, Wormy.
Remus flung his arm round Peter's shoulders, grinning.
You're forgiven. Come on, let's catch up.